Good afternoon. My name is Audrey Perry, and my research paper and presentation examine the Gospel of Matthew for an inclusive approach, celebrating diversity in the kingdom of heaven. I was compelled to explore the Gospel of Matthew's literary elements to better understand the author's tone and why some claim that Matthew's writing indicates an anti-Semitic perspective. Three questions drive this study, and they include, number one, how distinctive is Matthew's tone when discussing religious leaders in his gospel? Number two, given Matthew's background, is there evidence that his portrayal of religious leaders emphasizes the importance of diversity and inclusion for a growing church? And lastly, number three, if so, what principles can modern church leaders derive regarding diversity and inclusion from his insights? My research evaluates the literary structure, tone, and historical context of Matthew's Gospel. I wanted to understand why some assert the book as anti-Jewish. I wanted to remain as objective as possible, so I considered my preconceived ideas about his Gospel, that it had a Jewish tone, it acts like a bridge between the Testaments, and my assumption that Matthew employed an approach that was not biased. Matthew, identified as Levi from Capernaum and a former tax collector, likely wrote for a Jewish audience around 70 to 80 AD, possibly in Antioch. His references to the Old Testament are more than any other gospel author, and he shapes his work like an ancient biography would and divides it into 5 thematic sections, with salvation as the main theme, and I suggest inclusion as a secondary theme. Accusations of anti-Semitism against Matthew often cite the harsh language in chapter 23, where Jesus rebukes the religious leaders and teachers of the law. However, we must remember that Matthew is sharing his story verbally, so we should also consider how he may be using storytelling techniques, using hyperbole for emphasis. His tone does not seem to change to demonstrate ethnic biases or discrimination, but shifts when he is addressing truth or rebuking false claims. The Gospel honors Jewish heritage and prophecies, illustrated through his genealogy and his reverent use of the term kingdom of heaven rather than kingdom of God. Also, Matthew notes that Jesus instructed his disciples to focus first on the Jews. There are ways Matthew's approach honors both Jews and Gentiles. For instance, Matthew does not ignore the significance of prophecies, but highlights them. The Old Testament, referenced more in this gospel than any other, he traces Jesus' Jewish heritage and yet includes women with questionable backgrounds as well. Matthew recognizes Joseph's significance and describes him as an honorable Jewish man of integrity who demonstrates compassion and mercy. Matthew's structure highlights interactions with both the Jews and the Gentiles, seen in the inclusion of women in the genealogy and the visit of the Magi. His unique reference to the church in chapters 16 and 18 emphasizes inclusion and correction without ethnic bias. Instances like Peter's acknowledgement of Jesus as the Christ show Matthew's balanced approach in honoring all his followers. Jesus honors Peter, and yet in the next moment rebukes him strongly. This passage indicates that Matthew's tone is not predicated according to ethnic or religious biases. Jesus will welcome those who follow, and he will rebuke those who get ahead of him or get off course. Matthew's reference to church in Matthew 18 is highly significant. It discusses the process of rebuking a brother who sins. First, you go to the brother, and then you take one or two along, and if he still won't listen, you tell it to the church. As human nature would have it, a debate concerning who would be the greatest in heaven surfaces. A mother pleads for James and John to have the two best seats in the house. And then ironically, Jesus heals two blind men in chapter 20. Matthew then includes Jesus' parable about the workers in the vineyard who receive the same pay as those who were working long before they arrived. The master explains in the parable that they don't get to accuse him of being unfair. And as we approach chapter 23, we've read how Jesus fulfills the law of love on which all the law and prophets hang. One might note when reading contextually that Jesus' rebuke could be his follow-through for the principle given in chapter 18. Matthew describes Holy Week, Jesus' reference to his death, and his parables that speak directly to the Jewish-Gentile integration problem. And next, the story highlights an image on a coin. And the disciples ask him if it's right to pay taxes, and Jesus asks whose image is on it. After saying that they need to render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, then two other passages discuss the idea of belonging in a family and bearing someone's image. Jesus asks who his mother and brother is, and in chapter 22, the people ask whose son Jesus is. It could be this that connects Matthew to the Genesis theme. After all, we are considering Christ as a second Adam, the initiator of a new race that's by grace through faith. It would be interesting to continue the study to see if anyone else has made similar connections. It's no wonder that Matthew is called the Genesis of the New Testament. The evidence to support Matthew's perspective, exclusive and anti-Semitic, is insufficient. Further investigation actually leads to viewing Matthew in agreement with Jesus' desire for diversity, unity, and inclusive practices in the church. Just as Matthew acts as a bridge leading Jews and Gentiles to Jesus, Christians can use our words and lives to build bridges that bring others from being isolated to included in the family of God. Little by little, we are changed from glory to glory, being transformed into the image of his likeness, until when he returns and we can be fully like him. Here are three principles we can pull from Matthew's gospel to help us integrate a more inclusive approach to build a church that reaches all the nations. First, we can celebrate the unique gifts within each person and embrace unfamiliarity and comfort. If we want to reach the nations, we have to ask, are they worth it? Well, Jesus certainly thought so. We can provide accommodations to help within our communities. It may be a wheelchair ramp at the church, or offering earplugs for those with hearing aids, or providing an on-ramp for musicians who have different styles of playing than they're used to in our homogeneous churches. Lastly, we need to be mindful about our language and recognize that it shapes people's perceptions, and it plays a large role in how others receive us also. This effort to be more considerate should be used in daily conversations and in the pulpit. And it begs the question, are we willing to embrace the humility of going lower and thinking less of ourselves to become more inclusive? You see, assembling this bridge can be costly. Davis teaches that building bridges toward more multiracial assemblies will require that someone pay the price sociologically and relationally. It is often when those within cultures who have the majority say and power and influence, when they have to give up privileges to level the playing field, so to speak, it often feels like injustice. And this might be the view that those who accuse Matthew's gospel of being anti-Jewish, this might explain more of their understanding. To summarize my research, I will leave you with this one last thought. Considering the most recent outrage and political turmoil surrounding this topic, the study suggests that providing clarity to local church pastors navigating the waters of political, social, and economic turmoil is vital to the church's obedience to the Great Commission. Thank you for allowing me to share my findings with you.